When people think about waste, they consider it to be a nuisance, a burden that not only causes problems, but also diminishes the beauty of our motherland. But in a different light, waste becomes something else. Waste, it's not garbage, it's not nuisance, it's feedstock, waiting for the right opportunity to turn into a product. Who could give it the opportunity? You, me, together we all can. Greetings everyone, the name's Raghavarshini, and today I'm going to be talking about my journey through the wonderful world of biochar. But before we get into that, let's see a few facts, shall we? Our global population is about 8.2 billion. Each and every activity of our day-to-day lives produces a huge amount of waste, which is becoming a hassle lately. For example, the global municipal solid waste count is found to be about 2.5 billion metric tons each year, that is. And it's estimated to reach about 4 billion in 2050. That's a lot of waste. And it's not just one waste. There is plastic waste, medical waste, food waste, biomass waste, etc. There are a lot of types of waste. Throughout the years, we humans have found a lot of creative ways to both dispose and manage waste. For example, some of these wastes can be recycled or reused. Those are usually segregated and sent to recycling plants as such. Some of these wastes cannot be recycled or reused. Those are usually disposed or dumped in the outskirts of civilization. They're usually burnt, open burning. It's called open incineration, by the way. So yeah, these are a few ways in which waste is managed and disposed. There's another way in which waste is managed, which is turning that waste into a product that can help us human beings and make our lives easier. For example, we can take food waste. Food waste is collected, it's composted, and it produces two products. One is manure, and another is biogas. Manure is used in agriculture. It increases the soil fertility and increases yield. Biogas is used to generate electricity. So yeah, this is a way in which waste is transformed into a product to help us human beings. I'm here to talk about one such product, a product which I believe isn't getting the recognition it deserves. Any guesses what it is? That's right. Today, I'm here to talk about biochar. But wait, what is biochar? Biochar is a carbon-rich material produced from the pyrolysis of biomass. What is biomass? Animal waste, food waste, agro waste, those can be considered as biomass. Biochar has a porous structure, meaning it can hold a lot of moisture. It also has a superior stable structure. Normal biomass has a carbon rate of 30 to 50%, but when turned into biochar, it has a carbon rate of 50 to 80%. It depends on the type of biomass which you use or have. Biochar can be used for a lot of things. For example, it can be used in agriculture. It can increase the carbon rate in soil and help plants grow. It can also be used to store energy in the form of supercapacitors. It can also be used in water filters since, as I mentioned before, it has a porous structure. So yeah, these are a few ways in which biochar can be used. Now that we know what biochar is, let's talk about how biochar is produced. As I said before, biochar is produced from the process of pyrolysis. What is pyrolysis? Pyrolysis is the process in which biomass is burnt in the absence of oxygen in a controlled and in an environment. But you may be wondering what happens if we burn biomass in the presence of oxygen. Well, that produces ash, and that is called incineration or burning. But our goal for today is biochar, not ash. So pyrolysis it is. Now that we know how biochar is produced, its uses, applications, the pros and cons, let's talk about what I did with my biochar. Let me ask you guys a question. Would you believe me if I tell you that this picture over here, this picture of a kingfisher, is made of red bean husk? No, I'm not crazy. Raghavarshini is not crazy. This is made, the previous one, please. Previous slide, please. The previous slide, please. Yes, thank you. This is made from red bean husk. Well, actually, it's made from biochar of red bean husk. Let's rewind, shall we? My father, he's been doing a lot of research on the topic of biochar, and me being his daughter has been exposed to the wonderful world of biochar since a really early age. So, I remember one time in first grade where after learning about biochar, I ran to my teachers and blabbered it out, basically what young Raghavarshini did back then. So yeah, during my holidays, I thought of something. Okay, so my dad has been doing research on biochar. Why don't I make my own biochar? So I went to my dad and asked, hey dad, can I make biochar? And he said yes. So that's when my biochar journey began. For biochar production, we're going to need to do pyrolysis. As mentioned earlier, pyrolysis is the process of burning in a controlled and inert environment in the absence of oxygen. For that, I'm going to need a controlled environment, a chamber of sorts. For that, I searched around my house, and there, in the corner, I found it. A silver vessel, which was originally going to be used to store grains. My mom was going to use it to store grains, by the way. But since it's in my hands, I'm going to use it to make biochar. So sorry, Mom, it's fine now. So yeah, that's going to be my chamber. I also found a metal pipe next to it. What I did is, I took the vessel, the metal pipe, I welded it onto the lid, and drilled some holes in it since we don't want the thing to explode or anything. So yeah, that's my reactor, my chamber for my pyrolysis. I decided to call it RB reactor since my dad helped me a lot in this. He's my inspiration, he's my everything. So yeah, gotta give some credit. So RB stands for Raghavivek reactor. Now that I have my reactor, I'm gonna need the main ingredient, which is biomass. For that, I searched around my kitchen, and there in a basket, I found it. Brightly colored red bean husk. It had a really vibrant red color. It almost looked like it was calling out to me. So then and there, I decided to use that as my biomass. But first, I needed to be in a dried condition. So what I did is, I let it dry in the sun for a few days, and I got my dried, prepared biomass. Now that I have my biochar biomass and my pyrolysis chamber, it was time to start the reaction. So first, I'm going to need something to heat my pyrolysis chamber with. For that, I'm going to need an oven of sorts, a rocket stove of sorts. For that, I decided to use my tandoori oven since that was available and it was in my house and portable. So I added some modifications to it and turned it into a rocket stove, and I started the reaction. For the fuel source, I used coconut shells since we have a whole sack full of them. It was really abundant in our home, so yeah, I decided to use that. Well, I put some use into it. I started the reaction. After a few minutes of waiting and a few hours of waiting for it to cool down, I opened the lid, and inside I found it. My biochar, my black gold. I was so excited, I was so happy. I did something which my father has been doing for years. I was so excited. But then I had a question. Okay, so I have the biochar. What am I going to do with it? I asked my father about it, and he said, you can make supercapacitor with it, or even better, you can make water filter with it. You know, some simple stuff which I could do, but I had my own vision. You see, I love art. I've been interested in art since I was very little. I thought, why don't I turn this biochar into paint? And that's exactly what I was going to do. But before we do that, I'm going to need the technique to make it into paint. For that, I did my research. I researched a lot of places. I found a few techniques. A common one is that in ancient times, they took colorful stones like lapis lazuli, they ground it into fine powder and mixed some oil and resin and a little bit of water, and they made paint out of it. But I decided to use this technique, but instead of the colorful stones, I'm gonna use my biochar. I started the process. First, I took my biochar, I ground it into fine powder, and for the binding material, I decided to use some acacia resin. So in the market, they sold it in a solid form, but to make paint, I'm gonna need it in a semi-liquid state. I let it soak in water for a few minutes. It turned into a liquid state. I mixed it into the powder, added a bit of water, I mixed it well, and voila, I got my biochar paint. Like every normal person would do when they create a new product or buy a new product, I wanted to test my product. So I took a brush, I let my hand run wild. But first, I decided to practice some strokes. So these are the strokes which I practiced from my biochar paint. It came out really well, and I let my imagination run wild, and I made a lot of paintings. So these are my paintings. Yeah, these are my paintings. That one is my first try from the paintings of biochar paint. These are my first tries. That's a Japanese style, by the way. And this is a recent painting which I made. So these are my paintings. And next, I wanted to see my biomass in a magnified way. For that, I sent a sample to a lab, and there I got a microscopic image of my biochar. So, oh yes, this is an ultra microscope image of my biochar paint. So you could see the gum, the resin I used, and you could also see the biochar. Yeah, that's a piece of my painting over there, and that's how it looks under a microscope. Next one, we have a high magnified image of my paint. Next one. So yeah, this is a high magnification. You could even see small cracks here and there from the paint drying. So yeah, this is what I did with my biochar. I made paint using biochar. So I could do a lot in the future. Who knows, maybe I could do toothpaste out of biochar, shaving cream out of biochar, soaps, or hey, even I have a crazy idea. Why didn't I make 3D printing filament using the biochar? Like, see that? Why didn't I make that? But for now, I'm gonna stick with paint out of biochar. For now, that is. Throughout my journey, I learned a lot of things. If you look at it in a scientific perspective, I learned about what biochar is, the types of biomass, waste reduction, since biochar can be used in waste reduction, that is. Like, there are a lot of waste. You can turn almost anything, almost anything into biochar. So we can use this as a way to reduce waste. So yeah, I learned about waste reduction, and I also learned about the applications of biochar. I learned that if you give biochar an opportunity, you can do almost anything with it. You can do almost anything if you add a little bit of creativity. So yeah, this is scientifically what I learned. But if you look at the other stuff which I learned two things. One is patience. I learned that if you had patience, you could, it is really worth it at the end. That is, if you give it a chance, that is. The whole pyrolysis process, it took forever. I mean, 30 minutes of waiting for it to turn into biochar, then 2 hours of waiting for the whole chamber to cool down. It took forever. It tested my patience. But at the end, I learned that it is worth it. Because since I was patient, I got my beautiful biochar. The second thing which I learned is curiosity. Because I was curious about biochar, I had the idea to ask my father about biochar, its applications and source like that. If I wasn't curious about it, I would have never thought of asking him. I wouldn't even known about biochar. Hey, I wouldn't even thought of making paint out of biochar. I wouldn't even be standing here right now. Because I was curious, I'm standing here in front of you guys talking about what I did with my biochar and about biochar and its wonderful opportunities. Thank you for listening to speech. With this, I'd like to end my speech. Thank you.